before sunrise on a mild summer morning in June 1995. A 27-year-old television news anchor named Jodi hurriedly left her apartment in Mason City, Iowa, headed for work. But she never arrived, and her disappearance has never been solved. In 2003, two television news reporters created FindJodi.com, a website dedicated to preserving Jodi's memory and keeping her case alive. This is the official Find Jodi podcast. Welcome to our first Q&A episode of the Find Jodi podcast. If you are brand new to the show, if this is the first episode that you're downloading, it's probably not best to start listening here. We'd recommend that you go back to the very first episode of the series. And beyond just the few episodes that we've already done, we really have just, in some ways, barely scratched the surface with Jodi's case. There's plenty more to discuss than what we have so far, including persons of interest who police have considered over the past 25 years. And we'll get back to telling that story more in the next episode. But while there is that story to tell, this case is still unfolding in real time. And with all of the twists and turns the last 2.5 decades have brought to those of you who followed from the beginning, you know it's an impossible story to tell chronologically anyway. And so from time to time, we plan to step aside from the regular trajectory, if you will, of the story, and answer your questions, listener and reader questions about Jodi's case. We receive tips and questions and information to the website on just about a daily basis about this case. And so one of the purposes of the episode is to continue to encourage that interaction. Please send us what you have or what you think you may have, because we never know what kind of piece of information might be eventually pivotal to the puzzle in Jodi's case. But also in this episode, we'll address some of the most frequently asked and most common questions that Find Jodi receives. So Find Jodi team member Caroline Lowe will assist me in this episode to answer about 10 to 15 or so of the most common items that come up to us in Jodi's case. That is coming up next. Caroline, the first question that we have is probably the question that we've gotten most often over the last 6 to 9 months anyway. We get this one quite frequently, and it has to do with a television show that's out there right now called The Genetic Detective, and it features on the show an investigative genealogist named Cece Moore, and she uses the process of familial DNA, basically, to solve cases that are very similar to Jodi's. So the question that we usually get is framed around, has Jodi's information been submitted to the show? But really the question for the case is there potential offender DNA from the crime scene? Is there suspect DNA from the crime scene? Because that's what you need in order to start the process of identifying a suspect through this fascinating, relatively new advancement in law enforcement. The familial DNA is fascinating to me, how they're able to track down people based on their family trees. But in order to have that, we have to have offender DNA, right? So what physical evidence that we know of was collected from the scene that might be helpful in terms of possible DNA in the future?
What we do know is there was very little evidence, very little forensic evidence at the crime scene. We know that there was not blood evidence, something that would have been very valuable for potential DNA evidence. At one point, the investigator at the time on the case, Frank Stern, said they had a hair. You can potentially get DNA from a hair. We don't know anything more than that. He wouldn't go into details when he was asked if there was a root to the hair, which could give even more precise DNA. There's a palm print. Partial palm print was found at the scene. We don't know if potentially they got touch DNA off of that print. Now, granted, back when that evidence was captured, if you will, DNA was not very advanced then, so we don't know how it was processed then. Was the palm print put in a place that maybe there could have been some shedding? Don't know, but we do know overall there was very little forensic evidence at the scene, and it's very doubtful that forensic evidence is likely to be the key in this case. Hope we're wrong, but from what we know, there was not much forensic evidence at the scene.
So the simplest answer to the question that we get most often about the TV show is Jodi's case probably would not apply, probably would not be helped by familial DNA or any other DNA evidence, because it sounds like they don't have any. Now, we're not sure that. Maybe they do. As you say, Caroline, hopefully we're wrong about that. That would be very beneficial to the eventual prosecution of the case. But for the genetic detective question that we get all the time, the answer is no, probably wouldn't be able to help here because we don't believe that this case has that offender DNA, the DNA of the person that did this. We don't believe police have.
Exactly. Even if they were able to develop a profile off of what they found from the scene and then they were to send it to one of these databases, you still have to have something in the database. And again, we don't know what they have. We don't know the quality of the potential DNA that they have. We do know they have Jodi's DNA. They have hair from hairbrush for hairbrush. They were able to get swabs and things from her family. So if Jodi is found, they will be able to use probably DNA or her dental records to identify Jodi. The big question, though, is what do they have? And we know it's very limited in terms that might be forensically valuable in identifying a perpetrator.
All right, moving on. This is a big one, too. We get this a lot. For the last 3 years, the search warrant for John Vansice's prior vehicles that was uncovered and published by FindJodi back in 2017, I believe. Every year, annually, it is resealed by a judge. Every time that happens, people just bombard us with questions about why are they resealing that search warrant? So what can you tell us about that?
From what I can tell, again, we don't know what's actually in the specifics in that warrant, but when a police officer goes to a judge to get permission to do a search, as they did in John Vansice's case, they have to basically lay out what they have on to lead them in that direction, why they think that person might be connected to the crime. And that would probably tell us some things we don't know, or at least very possibly tell us some things we don't know about their case. And the only answer I've been given by the Cerro Gordo County attorney is they don't want to do anything potentially to jeopardize the case. Now, I've also seen over the years that sometimes what's in a search warrant doesn't add up. It may make the person being looked at not look good. We saw that in Jacob Wetterling's case. They were able to get search warrants against the neighbor of Jacob Wetterling's. When they were eventually unsealed, long after the case was solved, we saw what the basis of the case was. But the main thing you hear is authorities don't want to jeopardize an ongoing investigation. It's likely to have the nuts and bolts of why they think that person they're targeting is involved, connected with a crime.
And it's the county attorney in this case, along with the police, who go to a judge and make a case that the probable cause that's attached to the search warrant that provided the sufficient evidence to grant search the vehicles in the first place, if that probable cause were unsealed and made public, it could be potentially detrimental to the investigation. That's the argument that the police and the county attorney have made to the judge every year, and that's why it's resealed. That's our understanding of it anyway. This question comes right off the Facebook page, and it deals with some reporting that you did recently at FindJodi.com as well. It kind of crosses over with some confusion about the white van that Randy Linderman saw parked near the apartment complex that morning. So I've noticed some confusion between the truck and the van, and one of the questions on Facebook puts it like this: was it a white truck or a white van witnesses saw parked near her apartment that morning? So the answer is it was a white van. But let's separate those two incidents because they're very different. The white van was seen by one witness, at least one witness, on the morning of Jodi's disappearance at her apartment complex. Might have something to do with the abduction, maybe not. The white truck is something totally different. That was 9-10 months before. That was the vehicle that was stalking Jodi before, in that year before she disappeared, or at least Jodi was concerned enough about that truck that she called the police about it.
There's quite a bit of difference, other than both vehicles being described as white. A mid-size white van looks quite different from a small white pickup truck. But I think once we got the police report confirming that it was a white pickup truck, I think that white commingled things in people's minds. I remember you interviewed the person, Randy Linderman, who saw the white van, and he said he knew vans. He was sure it was a white van. So there's never been any indication that it could have been a pickup truck.
Yeah, the pickup truck is a totally separate incident, and it's been misstated even by police over the years to have been black in color. But we found, your reporting here in this last year, verified that it was a white pickup truck that was following Jodi about 9-10 months before she disappeared.
Correct. Almost 9 months before Jodi disappeared, she made a police report. It's very brief, the 2 lines we got in the police report that we recently obtained, but Jodi felt that somebody was staring at her, following her in a small, newer, white pickup truck. Initially, police described it as black. Years later, Josh Benson and Gary Peterson from FindJodi was told it was actually white, and that was told by Lieutenant Ron Vanderweerd, who turns out was the responding officer in that report. Then more recently, it's been described as white in a media interview, but when we got the actual police report, it's white. It is not black, it's white, but it's certainly been a sense of confusion over the years.
Another listener question, and this is one we've asked ourselves very often. Did you ever find out who was responsible for the January billboard vandalization? Did it have something to do with the case? So listeners will remember that in January, actually New Year's Eve of this last year, the FindJodi billboard on Federal in Mason City was vandalized. And spray painted on the billboard were the words "machine shed" and the name of a longtime original Jodi investigator on the Mason City Police Department. And it was so, it's so strange and so specific, and it seemed like, well, it must have something to do with something, right? But what is the latest that FindJodi knows about that incident from 10 months ago?
Absolutely. I mean, technically, we are the victims. It was the billboard that we paid for with a donation from one of our supporters, so that we were the victims in this case. But even as the victims, we don't know anything more than the fact that the billboard, whoever vandalized the billboard, we don't know where the investigation went. We do know they never identified anybody. Nobody's been arrested. Nobody's been charged. And we still don't know if it was just some kind of a drunken New Year's Eve thing, that's what the police chief said they believe, that it wasn't something more meaningful, or was it a clue? That billboard had been there since Jodi's 50th birthday in June 2 years ago and hadn't been touched. And then there is New Year's Eve, somebody writes the name of an investigator on the board and the words "machine shed." And that billboard was appealing for information. So was that somebody who was a New Year's Eve prank? Somebody who specifically did not like the investigator involved, because officers can have people over the years that obviously don't like them. And then, or was it meaningful? But it seems to really bother a lot of our followers, and it bothers us because we just don't know for sure.
This question has to do with an item of interest inside Jodi's apartment, having to do with the toilet seat being left up. One of the investigators on Jodi's case on one of the interview specials over the years made mention of the fact that the toilet seat in her bathroom was found up and Jodi lived alone. And so a bunch of different possibilities there, but the probably most logical would be that it was left up by a man. And as far as we know, there was no man inside Jodi's apartment the night before she disappeared. So that's been a notable piece of information for some over the years. And the question is, relating to the toilet seat, did they dust it for fingerprints? Did they submit it for DNA? Anything like that?
It's really hard to exactly. I know Frank Stearns mentioned it, and he mentioned it as something sort of unusual. He was one of the key lead investigators on the case. But there's several possibilities. Sometimes it could be the case of a police officer who's gone to a scene and used the toilet. You would think they would have been able to figure that out by now. It's also possible that Jodi was sick. We know she was running late. Could Jodi have had some intestinal issues? Could there be something like that going on? We don't know. The absence of knowing points to speculation. We've never heard any indication, any proof that Jodi did have a male visitor that evening, but that's certainly been part of the speculation for years, and without knowing that, there have been a lot of questions. We've also been asked, was the seat ever tested for fingerprints? We don't know that. You would think if they had questions about that, that's something they would have done, police would have done, but we've never heard if they've made any effort. Never heard of them taking the seat away to be tested, being tested there. So it continues to be something that people just aren't sure about. Is it possible the toilet wasn't working? We don't know if there's a plunger there, if something like that was going on.
This is sort of a broad catch-all question, but it is common, and it's inside the mythos of Mason City when it comes to this case. The long-rumored drug connection to Jodi's case, whether it be some kind of drug use that she would have been allegedly involved in, whether it be reporting that she was doing for some kind of investigative piece that she was working on, something like that. And we've said in previous episodes, our Billy Pruin episode, for example, where this drug connection comes up, I think we answered some questions in that episode. But the general broad sense of the question is there any substantial merit to any kind of drug connection dealing with anybody, Jodi or anyone who might have been involved in her disappearance that we know of?
No, as you said, there's certainly been lots and lots of rumors, speculation on the various forums. But from talking with her friends, talking with her family, talking with her coworkers, we see nothing, either have no indication that she was using drugs in any way. She never showed any interest in investigating drug deals. There's been speculation saying the Dustin Honkin case, which happened, he murdered 5 people in connection with a drug case a couple of years before Jodi disappeared, but none of that was known until several years after Jodi disappeared. So there's no way we found that she would have known of these from her work. The Billy Pruin case, there was talk that maybe she was investigating that. I've talked with her close friend Ani Cruz and others who said they were both very disturbed. Like, I think any of us who read the original report saying it was a suicide said that didn't add up. But I don't think it was any more than somebody who knew him who was friendly with him at the OP, the bar, so the lounge in Mason City, just saying that doesn't sound right. But I don't think any indication ever went beyond that in any way.
Another question we've gotten quite a bit over the last several months, and this was sort of all a bizarre circumstance as it came up over the course of this last year, but a man named Jerry Burns was put on trial recently for the murder of Michelle Martinko. And during the trial, they played some of the police interrogation video. And this trial was being televised and it was being streamed on the internet. And sort of out of nowhere, at the beginning, I believe, of his interrogation with the police, Jerry Burns drops Jodi's name, mentions Jodi Huisentruit in some context. And obviously this man being on trial for a murder of a different woman caught the attention of a lot of people who are also familiar with Jodi's case, which is too strange to make up. But what, if anything, have we been able to determine about Jerry Burns as relates to Jodi Huisentruit?
It does seem strange, and it definitely caught our attention. Actually, it caught the attention of an investigator I talked with pretty frequently in Iowa. And last I checked with him, it apparently did not go anywhere. He thinks it might have just been a case of somebody throwing out a name during the interrogation. But I'm sure they looked at it. I'm sure they looked the best they could, the investigators, to see if there's anything that could have put him in Mason City. We know that Jodi anchored, or she was a reporter for a while in Cedar Rapids, so could he have watched her on the air? But beyond the initial speculation and the similarities in appearances, a beautiful young blonde woman found similarities that way, nothing we have learned so far that would show any connection.
About Jodi, always it's been very ambiguous as to, was she dating anybody when she disappeared? And given the way sometimes these cases with intimate partners work out, I think it's a fair question, certainly for us to look into, and it's been asked of us repeatedly over the years for obvious reasons. So what's your answer to that question? Was Jodi seeing anybody at the time of her disappearance?
I think if we knew that Jodi was seeing somebody, if we ever confirmed that, that's something sort of investigations 101. While it's personal, it's certainly a key part of victimology, is establishing all the relationships the victim has to see if you're looking for motive. We know that most of the time, the people who murder somebody, they murder someone they know. It's rarely a stranger thing. From what we can tell from talking to her friends, the people who knew her, I think Jodi was very open to having a relationship, but had not met anybody in recent years. She had a steady boyfriend when she was several years younger, but in recent years, no indication that she was romantically involved with anybody. Couple dates here and there we'd hear of some people when she was in Mason City and before that, but no steady boyfriend, nobody that we could find at the time from her closest friends, and certainly no indication in the public part of her journal, which the former police chief wife had mailed to the newspaper that we discussed in a previous episode. You'd think there'd be something in there. She talks about wanting to meet somebody, but there's nothing in there that indicates she was seeing anybody on a romantic level. She writes about friends. She certainly mentions her good friend John Vansice, who owned the boat, who took her on the water skiing trip just the weekend before with several other friends, co-hosted a birthday party for her early in the month, but he's never comes across as a romantic interest in terms of Jodi's perspective.
And again, back to that WCCO footage of the apartments, Jodi's apartment, and again, back inside the bathroom, you can see in the video inside the bathroom, in fact, the cameraman notices this, and he zooms in on the 2 toothbrushes that are inside Jodi's bathroom, inside the cup holder there. What do we know about the 2 toothbrushes? Because if you combine that with the investigator saying the toilet seat being left up, very suggestive of maybe she had someone who was, again, with her the night before.
Well, one of the things regarding the toothbrushes, her friends have told me, is that she was very much into dental hygiene. I mean, you saw that beautiful smile. and that she kept a second brush for traveling. So maybe one of those brushes is from her, like her previous weekend. She had been on a water skiing trip. I don't think that's particularly out of the norm at all that she would have had a second toothbrush there. In terms of forensics from the apartment, if they were going to get something from the toothbrush, by the time we saw the video a few months later, I think it was close to 3 months later, I don't know what they would have been able to do. I don't know that they tried to get any kind of forensic things out of the apartment. We talked about the toilet seat earlier, but I don't know that they did any kind of testing there.
I'm not finding it on the Facebook page right now, but we did have a good listener question about Jane Does that are found, meaning unidentified female bodies that are found. Is Jodi being compared to those remains as they are found in some way?
Her DNA is already uploaded in the national database. If something happens, they have the federal government, the feds have that. Her DNA they have that, they have her dental records, so there really should be relatively easy to identify Jodi if there's any kind of, if they find any parts of her body, that she should be easy to identify.
I will be able to give credit for this question. It is also from the Facebook page. Crystal says, hope this isn't too personal. Would love to hear more about Jodi as a person. Growing up, what made her want to be a journalist? I'd love to hear from her family if they are comfortable sharing. As a young reporter, I feel connected to her. That's from Crystal Cole on the Facebook page. I've always kind of balked at talking about Jodi as though I knew her. Maybe it's because I'm in broadcasting, but outside of the television business. Also being a man, I only know Jodi through her video of her and seeing her in public and private life. But I asked this question of Josh Benson, co-founder of FindJodi, and he feels that connection to her, and I think you've said you do as well. So Jodi is the person, I think, is an important thing to talk about if you're comfortable, because with all of these cases, Jodi's and all the unsolved and solved cases, we all tend to focus on that one worst day of their life, and that defines them. That's their legacy in perpetuity, unfortunately. We've forgotten oftentimes about who that person was in life.
I feel comfortable talking about Jodi in part both to try to understand, to get some sense of what might have happened to her. Also, her loved ones, her friends, her family have been very open and talked about her. And many times over the years, other cases I've covered, family members have not been willing to talk. But in Jodi's case, she had so many friends. She had loved ones. Like I said, her sister Joanne has done just about every TV show that's profiled Jodi. She puts herself out there hoping that maybe making that connection, making people care of the loss might produce a break. I think if it becomes personal for somebody, if somebody's holding on to information, if Jodi is not just another crime scene, a piece in the puzzle, but a real person, a daughter, a sister, an aunt who's missing, I think it might help to solve her case. And in terms of Jodi, what she was like, I think by all accounts, she didn't want to go on to a big investigative career. That was reporting career. That was not her thing. Jodi was hoping to do a national show, maybe the morning show, the Today Show. She was hoping initially maybe to move up to the Twin Cities to anchor a show. She loved connecting with people in a way that you do as an anchor, different from how reporters typically do. That was not her goal. And she seemed to be networking all the time. From what we can see in her notes, hearing about her in town, she was always networking. She would go to a grocery store. It would take Jodi maybe a half an hour to get through there because everybody wanted to talk to her. They felt almost this overnight connection with her that doesn't happen all the time, but she built this relationship with people coming into their homes in the morning, doing the morning news and then the noon show. She loved to golf. We should say you can't talk about Jodi and her passion and interest without talking about golfing. She was twice the state part of our championship teams. Something she really cared about is what she was doing the day before. Two of her favorite things, networking and golfing, she was doing the day before at that Mason City Chamber of Commerce golf tournament. She had lots and lots of friends. They seemed to be divided in 3 or 4 groups. She had her Long Prairie, Minnesota friends from where she grew up. She had her college friends from St. Cloud State. Then she had her friends from the news business. She had her Mason City friends. So she seemed to have a lot of friends. She was always sending cards to people. She would buy cards, and so many friends have shared and relatives have shared cards, messages that she would send to them. And just the day before that golf tournament, that Sunday after the water skiing trip, she wrote a lot of notes to friends. Many of them received them the day after she was abducted. So she was very personable, loved life, Loved to travel. She traveled quite a bit. She was studied abroad in college. She spent a brief time as a flight attendant with Northwest Airlines before she decided that she said she realized her career was going to be on the air, not in the air, her words. Very much into self-improvement. She went to an Anthony Robbins self-improvement seminar and seemed to spend a lot of time on that. She followed the optimist creed, very much an upbeat person. She liked warm weather. I think the fact that she bought a sporty convertible, her Mazda, just a few weeks before she disappeared was maybe a clue that she had hopes of moving to a warmer climate, because certainly would not have been a good winter car. She mentioned in her journal maybe going to Arizona, told her friends maybe Arizona, Florida, someplace warmer if things didn't work out in the Twin Cities. Her interest in the Twin Cities, I think, was probably in part because it's a much larger market. It's where she grew up and is where her mom could have watched her do the news, where her sister and niece could have watched her do the news. So I'm comfortable talking about Jodi because I think it's important that people not see this as just another unsolved case. This is somebody's sister, best friend. She was supposed to be in a wedding the weekend after she disappeared. She was connected to so many people, and those people deserve answers. Those people want a chance to say goodbye and get some answers about what happened to her.
The question I get most often, and always have, probably always will until it's solved one day, is, are they ever going to find her? Do you think it's going to be solved? I don't know how you even go about establishing criteria to answer that question. Certainly a lot of it is hope on our part and just persistence. But I'll ask that question of you. Do you think this case will be solved?
We get that a lot. I would say if you asked me that same question several years ago, I might have been less hopeful. But what keeps me going is just over 4 years ago, Jacob Wetterling, the 11-year-old boy in Minnesota, was found. And I wasn't sure that I'd ever live to see that day. And Jacob and Jodi have been the two cases I've covered the longest in my career. And when Jacob was found, and it was a very, very different, they had a lot of DNA in that case, so that helped break that case. But when Jacob was found, that gave me hope that we'd find Jodi. Along those same lines, we also get asked, how close do we think police are to solving it? There's been speculation in the media from time to time that something might be coming. Even the police chief was quoted about 3 years ago as saying things were close. And that got a lot of hope. But then as we talked to him in the follow-up interviews, he said basically if they get that right piece of the puzzle, that right item, that's all they need. Well, that's been 3 years now. So flip side is in Jacob Wetterling's case, was he said I didn't see anything coming, and we found out a few months after they'd actually done a search warrant on Danny Heinrich. The person turned out to be the person of interest ultimately in that case. All this stuff was going on and we had no idea. So maybe, just maybe, there could be things going on in Jodi's case we're not aware of. I think if there were search warrants, we'd get wind of it now because they'd have to, even though they'd seal it, they have to file the fact that the search warrant existed. If there's a federal grand jury, we wouldn't find out, as we did with the two and earlier ones, we didn't find out till people who'd been called before the grand jury shared that, because federal grand jury proceedings are secret. But I'm hopeful. I don't think it's going to be likely to be forensics that are going to solve it in the end. Forensics may identify Jodi. I think it's more likely that somebody seeing that billboard, which is, we still have a billboard out in Mason City, seeing a news report, somebody who knows something, who may be connected to the person who took Jodi, comes forward. So I think it's going to be somebody coming forward that's going to be the break.
So in pushing forward with our investigation, sometimes you can get so wrapped up in one angle of the case and you risk getting lost down one particular path, And sometimes it's good for all of us, I think, to back up and reset. And it's a sort of a thought experiment that we did recently that you sent out to the team that I thought was very important. And that was, all right, reset, go back to the scene. What is not at the scene of Jodi's? What is missing from the scene? Because there are items of hers that are endlessly focused on that are reportedly found there, but there's lots of stuff that is missing and has never been found that we know of.
Yeah. In fact, I just recently did my own reconstruction at home, that I'm running late for work. I worked as a reporter for many years at a TV station in Minneapolis. I'm running late for work and my hair is wet. I've taken a shower. So I throw my blow dryer, my makeup bag, all my things into my tote bag, and I'm running out the door to go to work. I'm attacked. Things go flying. So we know in Jodi's case, they found a pair of red heels, they found earrings, they found hairspray, they found a bent key. But what hits me is what wasn't found. Where's the tote bag? Was it still on Jodi's arm when she took off? Where is her? We know she had more than one address book. Where's that address book? Her newer address book. She went, it's not like now where we have cell phones and all our contact information is right there. Back then, people used address books or Rolodexes. Where's that? Where's her makeup kit? These are things that stay with. Where's her wallet? Where did that driver's license that was seen on the investigator's wall come from? Was that a duplicate? Did her wallet get found somewhere else that we haven't heard about? But there are things, particularly that bag, that I'm kind of surprised that we didn't hear early on, bag or a purse, that they didn't put out a description of it. You know, have you seen something like this that might have been tossed or perhaps somebody held on to? But I want to know about the things that were not at the scene that probably left with Jodi.
We've heard about that. I think of it as a go bag for her work, just as big as she can carry, that her coworkers have told us about this giant bag that she would take that is never found at the scene, as far as we know. And another of Jodi's friends, as you mentioned, the address book is fascinating. They're shown by police an address book that is Jodi's, but it's outdated. It's not Jodi's newest address book. And this person had seen the new address book within a week of her disappearance. Where is that? All of these things.
Her makeup kit, there's no way, and I checked with her coworkers, she didn't keep her makeup kit at work. So where's her makeup kit? Where are the tools that Jodi would have had to do her job that morning? Where are these things that you would never go anywhere without? Where are they?
So obviously the search is for Jodi, yes, but it's also for all of these items that are missing from the scene and have never been recovered that we know of.
Exactly. So we don't know. We don't know about jewelry. We don't know what kind of jewelry. We know the earrings were found, but was there something else Jodi would have been wearing that morning? But the bag particularly stands out with me as it's also possible, I suppose, that somebody could have seen it in the parking lot, frankly, and stole it. But it sounds like most likely it would have been on her arm. Things go flying in the struggle. She's taken away, and she may still have had that bag on her arm. And that back to who might know something. Did somebody back then suddenly come across a bag that didn't make sense, or something that, a wallet, or something that sounded strange at the time Jodi disappeared?
Over the years, one of the observations I've made is that ring that Jodi would wear, especially in the Mason City years. Sometimes it was on her ring finger, sometimes it was on her middle finger, but in every photo, on air, off air, she's wearing this ring, and so we know she would have been wearing that morning as well. All kinds of things that we really, if you stop and think about it, we know to be looking for these things.
And we think chances are she was wearing a red dress. She had the red heels that she coordinated. She was very conscious of coordinating. She had a lot of hats. We don't know if she would have had a hat she was bringing with her to change into later. We don't know if she would have had gym clothes. We know she would go to the gym, go to the Y. We don't know if those things are missing as well. But that bag is what stays with me the most. Where is that bag?
And you're just haunted by the possibility that someone 6 months later on the side of a farm road in Iowa found a huge women's bag and had no idea what to do with it and probably threw it away.
And I'm kind of surprised in some ways that the police did not make an appeal back then for looking for the bag, if you will, because that was one of the things in Jacob Wetterling's case. The police went on and they knew he was wearing a red hockey jacket. They put a replica, a copy of it, and showed it to people. Now, maybe at the time they thought it was something that only the abductor would know, but it just seems to me after all these years, if they have that description, if they could put something out there, would that be something visually that might help trigger something? We need somebody to be triggered by something to come forward.
That's always good food for thought, I think, and that was a good exercise for us to do, just to go back to the basics, and you never know how you're going to think of things differently. And that transitions well into little pieces of information that I think you and I are both convinced that people in Mason City still have about this case, if not overtly, much more bigger information. But what kinds of information for the people listening, particularly in the Midwest and the upper Midwest, but anybody listening, what kind of information, what kind of things should people be on the lookout for that we want to receive from them when it comes to tips to FindJodi.com?
I would say if somebody held something back years ago who might have, say, been an alibi for somebody. For example, I did a case in Minnesota where the wife of the convicted killer initially said he was home that night, and a couple of years later she called me and said she lied. She was afraid of him, and only when he was in prison and she knew he was not going to be able to hurt her did she come forward. So I wonder what version of that person might be out there. Is there somebody who knows something? Is there somebody who saw something over the years that just never was interviewed by police or held back sharing that information. Now's the time to come forward, because people I've talked to, several people have reached out to us who felt they knew something. They can't all be right because they're all different people, but they've lived with this all these years, and I think they would find some relief, even if they find out that their person's already been checked out. Come forward, let the police go through what they have in their files, share it with them. And if they don't want to go to the Mason City Police, the Iowa DCI, or the FBI are options, or they can come to us at FindJodi. But don't hold on to that information. And you never know. It's something like that. Just somebody that did something that was strange back then that gives you reason beyond more that they were just sort of a strange person. What makes you think? Somebody maybe who was focused on Jodi, who talked a lot about Jodi back then, and then say didn't talk about Jodi after she disappeared. Just kind of go back to things like that. But I think the chances are it's probably somebody from that area, the northern Iowa, southern Minnesota area, that might have that information.
Yeah, and very much so. Did someone ask you to lie about something, even seemingly innocuous, back then, around that time? Or were you incentivized to lie yourself, where you were afraid that you were going to get in trouble, you were afraid of some kind of physical retaliation having to do with that, your spidey sense sort of was going off? I think there is something to, if you've had that feeling, that uneasy feeling about something, and we get tips like this quite a bit, where it's probably nothing, but it's bugged me for 25 years. I give that feeling a lot of credence. If you've had that uneasiness and it's lasted for 2.5 decades, absolutely, it might be nothing, but it might be everything.
And we don't want anybody to not come forward because they think, oh, it's not connected to who the police seem to be focused on. We think it's really important to not see that as your reason not to share information. So if you're listening to this, keep an open mind. If you know somebody who has something that may not even fit the name that you hear about most frequently, come forward. Or if it does fit, come forward. But don't hold back because you think the case is wrapped up in just a matter of not being able to put the charging pieces together.
Caroline, thank you so much for answering some of our most frequently asked questions. And as always, we encourage people to reach out to us at FindJodi.com.